Johnny.
Thank you very much, Chairman. And Sir George, if I can start with you. If we talk about doing another security review now, the country's just had the 2015 SDSR. So for your average guy or girl in the street, we're going to start thinking the keys in the title are Strategic Defence Review. What would your, now we're doing one sort of mid-term, what would your priorities be and why do you think we're doing it?
I think there's two fundamental considerations for conducting a capability review. The first is that the strategic circumstances have significantly shifted globally since the last Defence and Security Review, and you can spend some time examining what they are, but most of us have a feel for what they are. And the second, which I think is a fundamentally misinterpreted responsibility, is the rise of technology, which is going to hugely change the nature of defence and security in the next 20, 30 years, including the widespread use of autonomous vehicles and unmanned vehicles employing artificial intelligence, therefore taking people out of the loop in increasingly large numbers. And those two characteristics, I think, are the fundamental reasons for having the review. There's another good reason, which is that there wasn't enough money last time. So as a result of that, we can examine closely why we might have some more resources this time.
Would you accept it's quite hard for the British public to accept that we put a lot of public money into doing a strategic defence review just 2 years ago, and we are so sort of poor at looking at forward threats that 2 years later we have to do the whole thing again, and that they might find that quite difficult to swallow?
Well, the whole package includes the strategic decision by the nation to leave the EU and to change, by implication, the nature of our posture within the world. So that's a very good start to a review reconsideration. So are the finances associated with that decision, including such fundamentals as the fundamental shift in the pound-dollar balance. So I think if the review comes up with the same answer, then you're right. If it comes up with a subtly different answer, then it was worth doing.
Yeah, so, I mean, you touched on it there. What people, the general perception out there is that the whole idea of the strategic, I keep coming back to it, but it is the ability to look even 5 or 10 years in advance. If we can't plan 5 or 10 years in advance, what's the point in having all these procurement processes that cost billions of public money? Surely this has got to have an underlying tone to it, and it's simply not credible to say the whole world's changed more in the last 2 years than it has done ever before, so we're going to look at it again and again. It's actually all about money.
I didn't say that it had changed more than it ever has done before. You did. I think that the conditions have changed sufficiently to justify a review.
Okay, thank you.
Can we ask the others to come in as well?
Yeah, I mean, Sir Richard, what's your view?
So, I think we want to be absolutely clear that we're having this conversation at a profoundly important time. The reason we're having a review only 2 years after the 2015 Defence Review is that at no time in that review has the amount of resources provided to defence matched the programme. And that balance is now out by £2 billion a year. And so we've started having a review because there's an enthusiasm in government to reduce defence down to the money that's available. And I think that reflects some outmoded instincts about where the world is now. And I think what you're actually confronting is a strategic inflection point where, as George has described, the defence programme is unworkable in its current construct. And maybe that wouldn't matter if the world hadn't changed, but the world has changed profoundly. I mean, the Prime Minister last night at the Lord Mayor's banquet talked seriously about the problem of confrontation with Russia. That's probably not a conversation a Prime Minister would have launched even 2 years ago, not in those terms. So you as a committee are confronting a situation where you know the defence programme is falling apart, where you probably sense the armed forces are to some degree locked in a denial they can hold this together, but they can't hold this together. They are effectively fielding holograms of capability in some cases. And yet you're seeing how the world has changed. So yes, you need a proper strategic review of how the world is producing risk to the United Kingdom, how currently we can't deal with that risk, and you should be deciding, well, what you're going to do differently. And part of that is by stabilising defence with more money now. £2 billion a year for the next 4 years is about the baseline figure. And then, exactly as George has just described, look how to transform defence through innovation. That's a proper strategic discussion, which government is not having.
Just quickly on that point, if I can come to you, Sir George, on amphibiosity, and I know we're going to talk more in detail about that, so I don't want to go into it now. But it's simply not credible. If the government is going to come to the House of Commons or to the nation and say we need to relook at our how we're configured to face a threat, but we're going to save money at the same time, perhaps in the areas of amphibiosity, it's very difficult to sell that to the man on the street and retain credibility. What is your view in your position about proposals looking at reducing that thing that we've just talked about, the reliances we have from NATO and our role in these organisations that keep us safe? What is your view on proposals to essentially get rid of this country's capability when it comes to amphibiosity?
Well, if you take as a premise that certainly the three of us know that defence has been under-resourced for years, then the challenge that's been set to the Chief of Staffs now is to try to make further savings. And so, as is the style of these things, each service chief has been invited to find or consider areas where they might make reductions. So I imagine the First Sea Lord has a choice between having his left arm cut off or his right arm cut off. Nobody in the world of complex warfare, especially for an island nation that delivers force from the sea, thinks that a reduction in the sophisticated end of amphibiosity is a good idea. The question is how it's to be done. If you look back in history, just briefly, nobody has ever tried to look forward to the concept of opposed landings. And yet they have occurred time and again, most recently, of course, with the Falklands. And the truth is that you have to risk mitigate in every possible way the idea of projecting force from the sea. That's what we're going to do as an island nation across the whole of defence. The other thing that's changed fundamentally since years gone by is the weight of protective mobility, the physical weight. So the idea of lifting everything from a huge deck 150 miles inland is not practical, even with an unlimited number of Chinooks, unless you can reduce the weight of the vehicles which now society and politicians expect to be provided for people. So my view is that any capability review of our cross-defence performance, an integrated performance with all three services, needs to really consider very carefully why you would want to reduce amphibiosity at the expense of something else, when actually the proper answer is that you increase and solidify the quality of amphibiosity using an investment in new equipment and new capability, and you preserve the outstanding capability of the Royal Marine in the inventory across defence of fighting forces.
Thank you very much. And just the final one for Sir Richard, really. I mean, I absolutely agree with you that it is, we have a duty in this place. It's very, very difficult in the military, isn't it, to sort of bang your own drum about the capabilities, but essentially, you do see the threats we're up against, and you keep, right arm off or left arm off. It's not the time for that. It is, at this particular moment. What would your message be to those of us who have to go and advocate for a government that is persistently talking a good game about defence, but sees differences on the reality on the ground in places like Plymouth? What would you say that we need to do to make sure that essentially we do our duty by the people who vote for us and by our servicemen and women?
The first thing is you have to say that the policy of denial has run its course, and you are now confronting a choice whether you either stop denying that defence is unable to deliver the things it's required to deliver, or you're going to watch it fail. It'll either fail operationally, which would be a tragedy, or it's going to fail institutionally as people simply leave and capability doesn't sail. And the point that George made about amphibiosity is an extremely good one, and there are two lines of madness here. Are we really saying that we don't want the capability to put a force ashore over a beach and confine ourselves to ports? Are we really saying we never want to be able to take British people out of a trouble spot except through a port? Are we really saying we want to remove that capacity for humanitarian assistance? Because if we are saying that, then we're ignoring how the world really operates. And the second line of madness is this idea that if the Navy needs to adjust manpower and find more sailors, that the obvious thing to do is to cull some of the finest infantry in the world, which is the Royal Marines. So if the Navy needs more manpower, surely in defence there's a better way of finding it than culling your elite infantry that in any case supply people to our outstanding special forces. I mean, it's just folly.